I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. Chairman, it has become a tradition for our Western colleagues to gather us once a month. Everyone at the Ukraine meeting. Its only purpose is to demonstrate the inviolability of collective support. The West is on the verge of being full. The collapse of the Zelensky regime. These meetings become a meeting. Collective self-hypnosis, mainly aimed at the internal audience of the West. Not a word, really. What's going on in Ukraine, and about one reason for Ukrainian crisis. Your from Western colleagues won't hear it. Sponsors, including the Kiev regime, are not queuing up like today. Member of the Security Council of the European Union. Instead, they practice the horror stories about the situation in Ukraine and trying to give the impression of unbearable suffering for civilians. As a result of Russia's actions, to do it is enough for them to do it. It's hard because of the air and space forces, Russia targets related to the military potential of the Kiev regime. It has high precision. From Ukrainian life, the city is operating normally. If not, counter raids on Ukrainian men, which is against their will, Ukrainian dictator. Throw it on the front line like cannon fodder. We are still on this topic today. We'll be back. We don't envy our Western colleagues because the claims look odd given the sheer amount of video footage. Allegedly destroyed civil facilities on Ukraine. In Ukraine, there are elevators with a bunch of postal warehouses, shops, etc. Next. It's clearly visible. Ammunition detonation and fuel. It is also difficult to explain why, after the attack on the so-called peaceful people, hundreds of obituaries from the Ukrainian military have appeared in the network's entertainment center hotels. In these Western capitals, we must show selective blindness to crimes committed at heights. Because it contradicts the false, the picture of the world they are. They tried to impose it on the public, but to no avail. Ukraine is not in this picture. Violations, human rights, and 1,000. Political prisoners have no Russophobia or nationalism, and glorification, and whitewashed Hitler's accomplices, who had hundreds of conscience in their lives. 1,000 Jews, Polish Russians,
and Ukrainians, years of war.
Denied by the only argument, the fact that Ukraine's president is Jewish. Mr. Chairman, if our Westerners, colleagues try to convey it to the world. The public, though, I'll be small. A little bit of truth about what's happening in Ukraine. They didn't bypass by default. They will condemn another cowardly terrorist attack by the Kiev regime the day before yesterday. This is well known. On May 12th, the peaceful Russian city of Belgorod was once again hit by a large-scale missile attack. Shelling. For this purpose, 3 types of missiles are used, tactical missile systems. MLRS Alka. And a Vampire, made in the Czech Republic. But in 40 a.m., the result is 5 in favor. The day of the attack, an entrance to a multi-story residential building collapsed. The missile was launched. Volchansk countries, that is, territory controlled Ukraine. 15 civilians were killed. 17 people received all kinds of injuries in between. The victim was a 1.5-month-old baby. Unfortunately, Belgrade shelling, it lasted all day and was a rescue. I even had to have surgery, suspend several times. Three others died during Sunday night. This is just an episode of the Russian army actively advancing on all fronts. And more. The Nazis' failure on the Ukrainian battlefield tried to vent their anger against the citizens of peaceful Russian cities with powerless anger. By applying them, targeted strikes violate international humanitarian law. Of course, these crimes are mainly carried out. The Zelensky regime is responsible. However, the fault of Western countries is not much, less because Kiev sponsors the junta continues to supply her long-range weapons. He provided her with intelligence and sent her to Ukraine. His instructors and mercenaries hope to bring strategic failure to Russia and weaken our country. We will have the opportunity to discuss these destructive acts in detail. NATO countries at our initiative meeting on May 20th, so we won't stop there now. Let's just say what? Desperately waiting for your ward. The desired result. Sponsors of the Zelensky regime have begun to speak out in direct text. Give it to him. Permission to strike a supplied peaceful target with their weapons. As a result, in early May, British Foreign Secretary James Cameron made the most revealing statement that weapons transferred from London could be used to strike Russian territory, including outside the area of special military operations. Latvia's foreign ministry also confirmed that Ukraine had received weapons from partners, allowing it to strike Russian territory. At the same time, Western capitals have shamelessly condemned Egypt's blatant terrorist methods used by their wards and organized assassination attempts on journalists and activists in Russia. In March, the incident led to a major contract terrorist attack at the Crocus City Hall Concert Hall, a concert near Moscow.
Add to that the media's long-standing measures to ignore dissident opponents of the Kiev regime.
For example, the death of American journalist Gonzalez in the SBU dungeon. It is not surprising that citizens of Western countries are increasingly questioning their authorities and refusing to support them. After all, these values, which are regarded as the fundamental pillars of the democratic world, have not been trampled by their complicity in the crimes of the Zelensky regime. Today's Ukrainians are no longer even shy about their decadent anti-democratic neo-Nazi mornings. As a result, in April, Kiev notified the Council of Europe of restrictions on the constitutional rights and freedoms of Ukrainians. In other words, the Zelensky regime has thus decided to formalize its long-standing practice of oppressing its citizens. Information about the incredible scale of human rights violations in Ukraine is so difficult to keep silent that even in a State Department report released at the end of April, numerous facts of torture, persecution of churches, arbitrary arrests, and politically motivated killings were cited. In this way, Washington, London, and Brussels have habitually blamed Russia for everything, while forgetting that Ukraine began persecuting dissidents for human rights violations long before the special military operation, at least immediately after the anti-constitutional coup in Independence Square 10 years ago. Dear colleagues, today the inhabitants of Ukraine are facing a new phase of violations of their rights. So in a few days on May 18th, Ukrainian men of conscription age will become virtually disenfranchised. With the entry into force of the new mobilization law, they will find themselves illegal and will not be able to dispose of their property and funds, update and receive documents. Nonetheless, evasion of mobilization has reached a record level in Ukraine. This is extremely inconvenient for Zelensky, the sponsor of the topic, because according to their picture of the world, Ukrainians should be willing to defend their country. In fact, in Romania alone, 11,000 men of enlistment age are known to have fled illegally, and 19 people have died. In order to flee the country, potential recruits abandon their cars at the border, change into women's clothes, and use any trick to deceive their border guards. At the same time, the danger of going to the front line is only waiting for the poor and disenfranchised. The rich have the opportunity to formally redeem the conscription, But there is no need to talk about the children of those in power. They have long spent money stolen by their parents abroad, including Western aid. Colleagues, what are Ukrainians really worried about today? They are the rhetoric of Western sponsors interested in fighting Ukrainians. On Ukrainian social networks, Zelensky's repressive machine has not yet reached them. The question of incitement is getting louder and louder, but why and for whom should Ukrainians fight? For Kiev's arrogant and corrupt leader, his group, which has entered the constitution itself, even lost its formal legitimacy on May 21st. For Western geopolitical interests, the Pope weakened Russia. Ordinary Ukrainians know everything. They're starting. Understand what they are? This interest, war. The United States and its satellites have prepared the country at least.
Not at all since 2014.
Especially when they don't get news about how the lives of those liberated from Kiev are improving. The territorial regime of the former Ukrainian. Citizens are finally getting their trampled rights, including law. Speak your mother tongue, Russian. I want to finish. Contact K to our colleagues from developing countries. Think about all these trends. Found out what you can easily. Make sure you're there next time. Call, support certain formulas and plans, promoted by Ukrainians. The leader and his Westerners,
Sponsor.
They are so out of touch with reality that any meetings of which proposals to discuss will be empty at best. A waste of time. You'll be the worst. Ratio. Efforts to prolong the fire and the Kiev regime will come at a cost. Dozens, if not hundreds of thousands of ordinary lives. Ukrainians, against their will and against them, their country's interests are being abandoned.
A meaningless meat grinder.
You can stop her. Just send Zelensky, his gang, and the entire Independence Square. Power to where they deserve to be in the dump? Stories. That's it. I'm doing it now.
I thank the Russian representative for their statement.